This episode of Artist Decoded is brought to you by No Wave Academy. As creatives and artists, we have each personally experienced the turbulent road of artistic self-improvement. And as the co-founder of the LA-based artist collective No Wave and No Wave Academy, I can tell you that our objective is to offer an alternative path to a traditional arts education. No Wave Academy courses are taught by some of our favorite artists. They're also our personal heroes and colleagues. Some of these artists you may have heard on this very podcast, while others have been featured in exhibitions at the No Wave Gallery. Such artists include Casey Baugh, Mia Bergeron, Nick Runge, Sean Cheetham, and Kate Zambrano, to name a few. All of our instructors are working professional artists that have been showcased in galleries and museums, both locally and around the world. At No Wave Academy, we work tirelessly towards evolving the way you learn and to expand your artistic passion and craft from the very best in the field. We believe that everyone has a unique artistic spirit. With guidance, experience, and the proper tools, students have the ability to invigorate and elevate their work. You can unlock and unblock your creative inner voice. Join us and walk into the next chapter of your personal artistic evolution. Go to nowaveacademy.com. That's nohwaveacademy.com. Type in AD-10 at checkout for 10% off. Now, on to the episode. Hey everybody, welcome to Artist Decoded. This is your host Yoshino, and you're listening to episode 175. In this episode, I get the opportunity to talk to Colin Frangicetto, who is a musician and artist, best known for being the guitarist and songwriter of the band Circa Survive. Colin also has his own podcast called The Cosmic Nod, which is a podcast about the interconnectedness of life, art, and the subtle oddities in between. I actually remember listening to his conversation with a mutual friend of ours, Michael Phillip, on Michael's podcast, Third Eye Drops, where they talk about the origin of the name for Colin's podcast when they both traveled to Peru on a journey of ayahuasca proportions. And that's probably not a word, but I'm going to go with it anyways. We also talked about this popification that has been occurring within conversations centered around psychedelics and the movements they've created, which is important to talk about to understand the cultural ramifications that psychedelic movements have produced. And this idea of spiritual materialism comes to mind as well, which I don't believe we talked about in this particular episode, but it's something that I think about whenever people talk about psychedelics in a Western context. And as a reference, in my interview with anthropologist Sophia Rockland, we talk about this a bit. If you want to go back to that episode, a few episodes back, to check that one out. And I was recently connected to Colin through a mutual friend of ours, Jennifer Sodini. But Colin and I have crossed paths before in the past, which seems like eons ago, when I attended a Circa Survive concert back in the summer of 2005. We talk about that too, along with discussing the struggles of being a musician in a post-tech current pandemic world. We mashed together some of the realities there, along with some of the silver linings, and where Colin sees life as a musician heading into the near future. But before we begin, if you like Artist Decoded and you would like to help support, please go to our iTunes page, leave us a review, click that little 5-star review. It's kind of like when you were in elementary school and your teacher would be giving out those little 5-star stickers. Maybe she didn't give 5 out, but she gave some stickers that resembled some stars, and it just made you feel good. Didn't it make you feel good? It makes me feel good. So I'd really appreciate your support. Before we jump into this podcast and you jump into our brains and just seep into our gelatinous goo, this next track is called At Night It Gets Worse, off of Circa Survive's album, The Amulet, followed by our conversation. Hope you enjoy it. Into the history of when I might have seen you guys play. And I believe that it was at the bottom of the hill in San Francisco on July 31st in 2005.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's going way back. That would probably be that's like our first year of touring, I think.
That's really interesting. So like, I'm really curious, and I'm sorry if you've rehashed this like many times over like countless interviews and everything, but how did Circa Survive become Circa Survive? Because I know that Anthony Green was doing Seosin, and I'm not sure if their name is Seosin or Seoshin.
Yeah, I'm with you there. It seems like it changes depending on who's speaking. Sorry, my cat's having a hairball.
Oh no, it's okay. I couldn't hear it, but
yeah. So, I mean, I always say Seosin. I've heard both. I think Seoshin is actually the proper way to say it, but who knows? Yeah. So I grew up with Anthony. We met each other when we were very young. I think I was 17. He was 16. We were coming up in like the local hardcore punk rock scene together. Our bands were playing shows together, and we connected through drugs. We were, kind of surrounded by straight edge kids and a lot of people in the hardcore scene, just in that sort of like drug free movement. And he and I were two freaks kind of dropping acid and kind of still into all the stuff that other people were into as far as, musically. And I think the scene itself, but we connected over our love of altering consciousness and just being troublemakers, I think.
But back then, when you were a kid, did you take it, these psychedelic drugs with any sort of intention, or was it just like for the experience?
It was way more, I would say. I mean, it was a little bit of both, but I'd say it was a little more gonzo at that point. We were just it was mostly about, I think, diving deeper into freakhood and just sort of expanding, just continually expanding the distance between yourself and normalcy, I think, and like status quo. And psychedelics were always sort of a part of that for me ever since they became, a part of my life, like very, very young. I dropped acid at 14 for my first time. And yeah, I wouldn't say that I right away understood that there was this larger thing that it could accomplish, and larger purpose it could have when it came to mental health and things like that. But it seeped in over time, and I think even my first year of experimenting with LSD, I recognized that I was changing because of it, or my experiences that I was having were changing my perspective of the world. And in turn, it was changing my personality. And for the most part, I saw it as really positive changes. It was helping me become more confident in myself as just not needing to fit in as much. And I think at 14, 15, it's a struggle that a lot of people go through, is trying to seek approval. I think it also increased my tolerance for other people, and it increased my desire to sort of do what I wanted to do, but also to seek an existence that had as little needless conflict as possible. So I don't know, it weaved itself into the fabric of my existence pretty seamlessly from that point on. Even when I would go through periods of time where I wasn't really experimenting, I'd go through a year or two where I didn't have any psychedelic experiences, but I could still feel the lessons, if you will, permeating. And that was one of the more interesting aspects of it for me, was that I could feel the effects of these experiences echoing for years, and not in some haunting negative sense, but in a way that felt like it was helping me on my journey through life.
Interesting. So, yeah, it's interesting. Essentially what you're talking about is like empathy towards other people. And there's this quote that we pulled out: all humans have inherent value, and one of our strengths as a collective is that we all can learn from each other. Regardless of what level of social status you have, I think everyone has something to teach someone else. And then you said, even if it's just simply empathy and realizing that so many of us are feeling the same things at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
And this quote in particular really resonated with me because I feel a very similar way, especially when you're in the presence of anyone,
Mm-hmm.
and just really being present with that person, whoever it may be, regardless of social class or sort of economic, like survival concerns that people have, especially in like large cities. You know, I think there's a real power to, well, presence and happiness. You know, I think there's a correlation there, and there's many studies on that, but
Yeah.
just really like being able to learn something from everyone.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Yeah.
I think that's been a guiding principle for me for a long time. And with that said, it's also one of my greatest struggles and challenges when it comes to times of extreme political unrest. And it seems like that's one of the lessons that I have to continue to learn over and over again, because I find myself in a place where I can be, for lack of a better term, triggered into a state of defensiveness and become very argumentative and really feel like I need to shout down a stranger on the internet for saying something I disagree with at times. And, you know, it's like a cycle of unlearning that I go through over and over again. And it's probably no coincidence that it seems to coincide with these, like, you know, election year cycles. But yeah, it's
Totally.
like, it's something I really struggle with, but then I usually come out the other side and see that, you know, I guess you could say I'm sort of a big picture type of person. So I always am trying to think further down the road. And when it comes to conflict like this, there has to be an end goal that isn't just endless conflict, right? It's like, so how do we get anywhere with any of this? And I think you eventually realize that conversation, patience, acceptance, and an attempt to learn from your opposite is usually the way through. It's usually the way to progression. And that's not to take anything away from political struggle and righteous anger, because I think that we can look to history and see that that's usually the only way that we get anywhere with human rights, unfortunately. But I think that there is this really golden window that is always sitting there waiting for us if we approach it in a way that's honest and that is like dialogue with our opposites.
Yeah. And I mean, that brings me back to just thinking about empathy too.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, what's interesting is I was watching, as many of us Americans and, you know, people all over the world, that last, and without making this, you know, a huge like political just conversation, which we probably could go there if we wanted to. Actually, not probably. We definitely could go there if we wanted to. But the Axios on HBO conversation, and I was so just thinking about another person's point of view. I was trying to be as objective as possible at understanding. Okay, so all this information that they are talking about, if I were someone that were on the opposite side, like if I were a Trump supporter, for instance, what information is he giving me in order for me to validate my response and validate the things I believe in order for me to vote for him as president again?
Right.
You know, and really trying to step out of my personal biases, listen, and try to understand where this person's coming from. I have not come to a conclusion yet, but but I don't know. I think it's a good exercise just to, you know, that's just, you know, like a personal anecdote for me, but I think it's a good exercise to be as objective as possible about just information on a spiritual sense, trying to listen and understand like the purpose, the reason, and just listen. You know, I think there's like such a huge power just being able to listen and try to understand where someone's coming from too.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think when it comes to politicians and, just figureheads in general. I try to not even really, I mean, I see that they're human beings, right? And I do think it is.
You sure about that?
Well, we could go down that road. We could talk about.
He's just gonna unzip and he's gonna turn to a broom.
Yeah, there's definitely. I mean, and I'm sure there's a lot of people out there that could, hit us with some theories on some reptilian shit or whatever. But I like
let's plug those people in. Now. Let's phone in. Let's see. Let's just go on Instagram. Look up Hannah. Yeah, exactly. Is that a reptilian mutant creature in the background screaming for?
With all due respect, that's a bunch of malarkey.
Yeah. So, from my perspective, what I try to do is take an approach to those people in that just to see them as humans who have gotten themselves in this position of power, and remember that they started out as little babies that had moms or dads taking care of them or whatever, and they were at some point like that. And I try to cultivate empathy in that sense. But when it comes to my, deeper work in this whole arena, I think it's really about the people who, because I think we're all being manipulated. I think that, and I think that that's coming from all sides of the spectrum politically, and we could definitely split hairs for sure, talk about the differences. But I think ultimately my work is with just regular people who aren't politicians and trying to understand people who think differently than me. And I think ultimately it's more about trying to find the Venn diagram of overlap of where do we actually have some things in common, and trying to start there. And there's obviously a lot of instances where this is, you could say, futile. But I think ultimately it's just about figuring out for myself, who I find myself in distress often. How am I spending my energy and my time? So it's a reflection that I try to have as often as possible. Is it really going to make a difference if I sit here and argue until I'm red in the face with this person who thinks completely opposite things from me, regardless of whether or not I feel my argument to be righteous? Isn't there a better place I could be putting this energy and this intention that would have more of an effect, and perhaps a more positive effect? So it's, and it's not even just politically. I think in general, something that I've felt to be a really important teaching over the course of, becoming a part of the psychedelic community, meeting people who I see as teachers and who have understandings of certain concepts that I feel like I'm still trying to understand. But I think ultimately this notion that, because you run into this a lot, like this kind of Timothy Leary conundrum of well, how can we get everyone to drop acid, And it's kind of the point is no, that's not the point. The point is to embody whatever teachings these things have given you to the point where people actually want to know why you are the way you are, how you learn the things you learn, and why you live the way you live. I think it was a Ram Dass saying your family doesn't want to hear you ramble on about Buddhism or Christianity. They want you to be the Buddha. They want you to be the Christ. So it's kind of be the teachings that you've taken in and be the medicine yourself. And that's going to have the biggest impact.
Yeah. I mean, I think the leaders and the people that just lead by example, they're usually the most effective teachers, because, people are smart enough energetically to understand that, you don't even have to preach anything necessarily. You just have to be you and be comfortable in your skin, and people kind of come up with the conclusions themselves as to what sort of lessons they can take from it. So I was wondering, because I was listening to some conversations with you and a mutual friend of ours, Michael Phillip. And
hi, Michael. Love you.
Hey, Michael. Yeah. I'm going to grab your third eye and stick it in my mouth. I don't know why I would do that, but that's just an interesting visual image, isn't it? So I was wondering, like, what was the reason for you and him wanting to go to Peru together to take ayahuasca?
Well, yeah. What was the reason? Yeah, I think it was an interesting overlap of serendipity, synchronicity, whatever you want to call it. I had been for many years actually quite adverse to the idea of drinking ayahuasca. It wasn't really on the top of my list of things I wanted to do.
Why is that?
It just, it has this reputation of being quite a brutal experience. It's, associated with, I'd say the most common thing people associate it with is getting sick. The purge aspect of it is, a lot of people who do it definitely go through a consistent purging process where you're throwing up or shitting. And
Wow.
I mean, purging can be anything, I've learned. It can be yawning, laughing, burping, all kinds of things. But
I never thought that people would defecate themselves.
Yeah.
Like I never even thought that would be a possibility, but I can imagine.
Yeah, it's definitely a possibility. I didn't really have any issues in that department, luckily, but it certainly happens. And so for a long time, I think it wasn't on the top of the things I wanted to try. And then out of nowhere, really, I mean, I would say it was like in 2018, I started having these, I don't want to call it like obsessive thoughts or anything, but just sort of, it kept popping into my consciousness, this idea that I felt like it was something I started becoming more intrigued about it, and I started researching it, and I guess at a certain point I did almost start obsessing over just, it had a lot to it that was intriguing to me, especially people's consistent stories of feeling called to it by, I would say, an energy or a spirit or an entity of sorts. And I found that to be really interesting. And then perhaps, I think skeptics would probably say that maybe I made that happen for myself, or it just happened for me. But so I started having these like dreams, and I started having these impulses, and I just decided, okay, 2019 is the year that I'm going to do this. And I really was at first interested in finding something domestically. Like there's a lot of like underground ceremonies in the US, and it's pretty easy to find them. So I started really just doing some very basic probing around, looking for domestic ceremonies here in the US. And that same day, Michael texted me out of nowhere and was like, "Hey, have you ever drank ayahuasca?" And I was just like, no. It was literally like a minute after I had fired off a message to someone else, like blindly asking about, a domestic thing. And so I found the timing to be interesting. And then he told me that he had sort of this open invitation to go to a place in Peru that was run by someone who had been on his show multiple times. This person, Hamilton Souther, he told me that he had this open invitation for years that he hadn't taken him up on. And I was like, yeah, I don't know if I could do that. I think I'm more, and I told him that, it was interesting timing because I was looking into it for myself, but that I didn't think I wanted to go out, travel outside of the States. And then I didn't know if I wanted to commit to a full program of sorts, because a lot of these places are like, it's a full like week, and at least the place, Blue Morpho, where we went, it's 5 ceremonies. So you drink 5 times in 7 days.
Wow.
Yeah, it's intense. And so, immediately I was like, yeah, I don't really think that's for me. And then that same night, I was going through a bunch of the stuff that I was listening to kind of for research purposes. And I had all these things set on like in my queue. And then one of Michael's podcasts with Hamilton popped in, and I was just like transfixed. Like I just thought there was something really powerful and special about the way Hamilton spoke about the experience and overall his point of view. And so it just sort of pushed me over the edge, and I text Michael. Well, Michael had said he doesn't think that he was interested either because he was sort of put off by the travel and just sort of parts of it that felt a little scary.
Yeah.
So then I pushed him a little bit and texted him and said, hey, if you ever want to do that, I'll go with you. And so then that just kind of put it all in motion, and the rest is history.
Again, I'm sorry if we're rehashing this, but
no, not at all. It's there's always something new that comes out of these conversations. So
I also find it, kind of this funny zeitgeisty conundrum that occurs too when having conversations like this, because it's such a, especially in like, I guess the culture that we're around, it's very popified, the conversations about psychedelics and ayahuasca and all of these things. But I think they're super interesting. I've never done ayahuasca actually, so this is especially interesting for me just to ask you some of these questions.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, but what was that experience like? The experience in its entirety?
Man, well, I think my response, and again, this is me projecting because I could never put myself in a person who has given birth's shoes, but I would say that, if you ask someone who had given birth, what was that like? I feel like they would say everything. Like this experience truly was, it ran the gamut of so many, just the whole entire spectrum of emotion and experiential, everything from the preparation to go out there to the travel itself to being there. There were people there from every single continent. And so the group of us that drank together every night and who were kind of together throughout this experience was absolutely incredibly diverse and beautiful. And it felt very special to me. But I mean, I felt everything. I mean, I had my lowest of low experiences there and also had probably the most blissful, dare I say, angelic experience, within 48 hours. So it was everything. And I'm so glad that I did it. But, a caveat, like I would say that there's a lot of problematic aspects to Westerners traveling to South America or all over the place really to partake in ayahuasca. And ayahuasca tourism has there's just a lot of problems within it in itself. And I think something that I took with me, one is that I don't think that would be a normal thing for me. And I actually think that my initial impulse to seek out something domestically is a little more aligned with how I feel like it should be done for us here, unless there is an intention of reciprocity, a plan to stay involved in the indigenous people and to give back. That's become important to me since my experience last year. But I do think that we have to be aware of how this affects resources, just in general. I mean, the flying in general takes up an immense amount of resources. And I think going to a place where it's being sort of like ravaged by tourism and the effects of scarcity and all of that play into the whole dynamic. And I think it's really important to be aware of it and try to be on the right side of that if you can. And I think for me, the answer to that, after a lot of reflection, is the right side of that for myself is to stay out of it and not be here, or not go over there, repetitively, because I don't have a place over there where I could do the right kind of work and contribute in a way that I think would be more positive than negative. So I'm super grateful for the experience, and I think it's absolutely changed my life for sure. Yeah. I feel like all that's kind of important to say.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's good to be conscious of that and have some sort of like disclaimer based off of our privilege being Westerners and being able to even travel somewhere else in order for us to have these experiences. And I can imagine that there's a moral cognitive dissonance that occurs, assuming that we're moral people that believe in such things. I mean, it's interesting just thinking about, I don't know, just the society that we live in, and how it's bred people to just constantly take. Maybe even it's an unconscious thing too.
Mm-hmm.
It's so embedded within like our train of thought to just be taking resources or taking things from other cultures. And then, yeah, I don't know. I just think about that quite often, especially when it's tied to like moral issues.
Absolutely. And again, I think, did you wind up talking to Sophia?
Yeah. 2 podcasts ago.
Cool.
She was on the pod. I had a really good conversation with her.
Yeah, she's wonderful. She wrote a really powerful article recently that was just saying that, ayahuasca use by Westerners without reciprocity is extractive. It's an extractive process, and it's problematic. And I thought that was just a really important piece. And just how I feel in general about this kind of thing, whether it's resources, traditions, etc., culture. Like there has to be active reciprocity for it to not be problematic. So that's something that, for me, I mean, the experience only showed me even deeper. So really grateful for it, and I think in general, I've had a lot of there's just a lot of mixed feelings that come along with anything that are tied to traditions and cultures that aren't your own, and you just have to be respectful and careful about how you interact in those spaces.
So I'm curious, like, living in Portland, and just that we're speaking about various moral issues, and I know in 2018 in Los Angeles, homelessness went up, I believe it was 16 or 18% from the year before that. And you can visually see it. And I know that in Portland, there's quite a bit of that homelessness. I guess, since we're speaking of sort of ethics and moral issues, like, what are your thoughts about that?
It's extremely daunting, and it's everywhere here. And it's been on the rise consistently since we've been here. And it's one of those things that I don't really know how to not be a part of it. I feel like no matter where you go, there's some type of like gentrification occurring. There's some type of, basically like, we're just in this like zero sum game here with, capitalism and especially American capitalism. I think it's really disturbing. And it's like, back when I was actually actively like going outside a lot and participating in normal everyday life, it was like normal for me to give out $20 almost every time I'd be outside. It's like, oh fuck, I'd have to get a little smarter about this, because I would just be like, anytime I had cash, just we had people, certain homeless folks that we would see on a regular basis, and you just become sort of like, okay, I care about this person. I want them to be okay. And even the people that you don't know, you start to just feel like whatever you have is like, you're already so much luckier and so much more privileged than someone that's just out there exposed to the elements constantly, and in a place where, as I'm, surprisingly, I became a homeowner like 4 years ago when I moved here. So it's even more complicated for me, because that's not something I ever thought I would achieve. Really never thought that would be possible.
Why? I'm curious, why do you say that? Because I mean, like, I'm asking that too, because just the trajectory of how musicians make money, and, you were kind of in that transition when, and I know we talked about this a little bit on the phone, but how, you guys were releasing your first album, and then it was on, I believe, LimeWire, because that was popular back in about 2004. Right?
Yeah.
So people could actively pirate music, which is clearly, and it's been unfolding the past like 20 or so years, taking away money from, musicians, and, being a professional musician, and also just, having to cancel your tour because of COVID. Like, what are some of your thoughts on that?
So like connecting the dots a little bit to like what I was saying about never thinking I would be a homeowner. Like I made the choice to go full-time art life at the beginning of this band, which was over 16 years ago now. But even before that, I was in another band called This Day Forward for 7 years. It started in high school as like a joke way to be close to my friends and kind of like be part of the scene or whatever. But really that was the building blocks for what Circa became, how we launched and everything. We really launched Circa off, the ashes of This Day Forward, because This Day Forward was this thing, like I said, that started as a joke, but eventually that's where I experienced my first record deals. That's where I've experienced my first, playing big showcases and shows and getting a booking agent and going through the music industry in that way. And that band even took a shot at doing it full time. We did it for a little over a year before we eventually collapsed and broke up. But that's where I learned a lot of the potentialities that were there, as like in the margins, like how you could make enough as a punk rocker to pay your bills, kind of in a similar way as like you could make enough as like as a painter, to pay your bills. But it can get really dicey and really scarce. And I knew that, and I chose that path and presumed that I would sort of be living in a month-to-month existence for most of my life. And it was because I was just literally like wanting to die when I was working multiple 9-to-5 jobs and just trying to hustle in that way. It was just not fulfilling, and it was so depressing, and it felt like for myself, for my spirit, it did not align. It didn't feel like that was a life worth living for me. So I kind of decided, it sounds like melodramatic, but I literally felt like I would rather be homeless than work at Best Buy for the rest of my life. I just can't do this. And yeah, so I never thought in a million years I would be able to, make enough money to afford to buy a home. And when I say that and say that I have now, by no means am I out of the, month-to-month existence. It's just that I've had periods of time where I've been able to get ahead, pay off some debts and then save up enough. Certain years have been good enough, and I've been able to, manipulate that system to the best of my ability to find myself here. But, certainly still have times that are really scary. And especially in a pandemic, it's been extra scary. Like you mentioned, we had a massive tour get canceled with very little notice. And we had already been off the road for a long time. And most of us were depending on that tour to be like a year's worth of salary. So it was kind of like all hands on deck emergency. Oh, fuck, what are we going to do when that happened? But yeah. So it's weird. I mean, being an artist is a strange existence, especially as you climb certain ladders of quote unquote success, because perception of your existence warps out way faster than the reality. So, you could have your profile get a lot bigger way before your stability or your financial situation changes significantly.
Definitely. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's, those are the realities that we have to talk about.
Mm-hmm.
Choosing the life of the artist's way
Mm-hmm.
is just, and at the same time, I say that, and it's like, we all have to like understand like the difficulties and be able to navigate this world that we live in that uses paper in exchange for goods, essentially, this thing that we have associated to have some sort of value. But
it's such a load of rubbish.
Oh man, I love it. I love it. Just keep on hitting me with it. Yeah, just sprinkle it in there. Yeah. So like, yeah, I mean, I think it's good to talk about these things because, I think on the outside perspective, and also just thinking about just romanticization in general, that I think is very much embedded in Western culture, whether it's through films or through just this idea of the pursuit of happiness or the American way, building yourself up from the bootstraps and, working hard and, getting to a place, et cetera, right? And I also think it's much more difficult because there's so many different ways for people to get entertainment. And there's so many distractions out there constantly at your fingertips that it makes it even more difficult technologically, but also it makes it more difficult for like artists to make money. And because there's just so much, I mean, you could spend almost your entire life watching Netflix if you wanted to, and you're not going to get through all the programs or all the, the shows because they're constantly adding more information, and yeah, so I'm curious, how are you guys able to adapt during this time, with the shows being canceled and everything like that? Because I would assume that aside from your guys' Patreon, that is like a huge way for you guys to make money is through playing live shows.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, for us, I would say in a given year that touring makes up, I would say, upwards of 80% of our income. We just started our Patreon this year, so this is it was obviously actually a thing that we were working on slowly in the background before any of this shit happened. And I launched my own Patreon back in February before the pandemic, and then when shit hit the fan, it felt like that was our only hope to be able to cultivate anything with regularity. And we saw that it was going to take a long time for anything to come back, and that we needed something way more than just like putting some merch in the merch store or, anything like that just would be way too short-sighted. So for us, over the years, we've just built our profile as a touring band up, and slowly but surely got paid more and more for shows. And you leverage that with promoters, with a booking agent. And it's like, you can get to a place when the touring industry is like at a healthy spot. We knew that if we went out, that we would draw people to a certain extent. So we could take gambles essentially, and we book tours and do door deals rather than guarantees for a lot of those tours. So, and you do that so that essentially the promoters are taking less risk up front. And they're saying, well, hey, if the show does well, I'll give you a bigger cut if I don't have to put my ass on the line and give you this big guarantee no matter what. So we would take that, and that's how we built our career in a lot of ways, is by doing that. Not only would we make substantially more money, but we would get these great kind of relationships with promoters, and then you sort of like leverage that over time, and then it's like you're booking tours where your guarantees are just massive because of your history and your relationships. And yeah, I think we were just in a really comfortable place when it came to that, and we had this rhythm of touring where every year we were attempting to tour less but make more money. That was the idea. As you start getting older, as multiple members of the band have kids, and all of us, I think, are craving time at home more than we ever have in the past. So we had it down pretty well, but we took some more time off than we had planned to, and in a lot of ways we just got comfortable and thought, we never thought there would be any reason why this tour would go away. So everyone was kind of budgeted up to this tour, and knew, all right, well, we'll get paid when this tour is over, and then everybody will be good again, and it's fine. So yeah, we all got put against the wall in a lot of ways. And so now we've had to adapt and basically become more than just musicians. We're content creators, if you will. We're on our Patreon, which is like essentially about 2,000 people. We drop a whole lot of stuff on the regular every month. And it's stuff that we're making while separated, because I'm on a different coast than the other guys. But yeah, we're surviving purely off of that right now.
Yeah, it's crazy how things have just like the paradigm has shifted immediately for a lot of these things. You know, it's like the business model that you guys set up for yourselves. And it's interesting also just to talk about, you know, as much as I'm kind of like toggle the line between like anti-capitalistic sort of a thing, you know, just because of how like detrimental, you know, there's that saying, if capitalism were a person, to be a sociopath.
Oh, that's
for
sure.
So I kind of take it to heart a little,
yeah,
a little bit. Right. But, I think it's interesting just to understand how the economic structures of these things work, such as, you know, within the music industry. And I mean, you guys are performing on like a really high level. I mean, you know, like, what was it? Blue Sky Noise reached like number 11 on the Billboard 200 charts when it came out. Yep. You know, so it's not like you guys are an unknown band. You know, you're really popular, and you have a large fan base. And then so like, you know, thinking about just how the gallery model works, and, you know, that's getting unraveled because of COVID-19, and that's been getting unraveled too, just because of the expense to have a gallery space.
The internet.
Yeah, the internet, and the artists can sell directly to people. And you know, even in the film industry, budgets are getting slimmer and slimmer because there's more places to be entertained. You can go on YouTube. People are creating free content on there. So people are going less to theaters, and all of these things that are unraveling, that makes it harder and harder for creatives to actually make money.
Yeah.
And then so because of these things too, I think about just what is the reason why you want to keep on doing what you do?
Yeah. Amazing question. And I really, I mean, I really resonate with so much of what you're saying. And I share a lot of those feelings, you know, as far as capitalism goes. And I think it's been one of the things that I've had to like really reflect on and do a lot of like, you know, meditating on, is just what happens when you pull away the dynamics of finance from art, and because I think a lot of my own inspiration is being born out of necessity and born out of scarcity, and this almost borderline sick impulse of trying to win the game. You know, it's like, oh, I get this idea, and how can I tease out whether I'm excited about this idea because I think it's beautiful or I think it's powerful, and tease out the part of me that thinks it's going to be successful. You know, it's like, it's so insidious the way it's entwined in even in just my dopamine response when it comes to making work, both visual art and music. Everything I do creatively, I have to sit there and think about that. And I think it's important I think it's an important task for all creators to think about this, because, you know, we can all sit there and just do the mental experiment of what kind of work would you be making if all your needs were met, if you did not have to make rent, if you did not have to do anything beyond what you're doing already to exist, as far as, you know, your hierarchy of needs, everything was taken care of. And I just think it becomes a really interesting thought experiment. And I think a lot of us are addicted to capitalism, even those of us who are being punished by it. And it's a really interesting thing. And I think, you know, because there's something about making work, you know, you make a painting or you make a print and it does really well or whatever. And there is a weird rush that comes with that, right? And it's at least for me, you know, over the years, it's been difficult to navigate that response and try to continually go back to the well of inspiration and like try to like, you know, sort of like filter out all the poison. Be like, okay, like what is in here that's trying to make me make work that I think will sell, or make work that I think will do anything other than what it's really supposed to be, which for me is like communication.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, that's the medium, isn't it?
Yeah.
The medium is supposed to be a communicative medium, whether that is incentivized by monetary gain,
right,
is another question. You know, so I think it's good to separate the idea of what good art is just because it's validated by commerce, and, you know, what is like a commodity, right? And because some of the best artists that I know, at least in my opinion, so, you know, I'm being a bit subjective here, but the best artists that I know are actually the ones that are struggling the hardest.
Yeah.
You know, like,
absolutely.
And it seems like the ones that are doing, I mean, I'm throwing this generalization out there. The ones that are doing the best monetarily are, I think it's just a communicative thing where people understand it the most. And yeah, and they get the rewards for it. And also, like, I don't think there's anything wrong necessarily with getting these rewards.
No.
But I think that there's something wrong with just doing things to seek the reward.
Yeah. And I think we could probably sit here and dissect a lot of the trends within, I mean, for me, it's a lot more obvious within visual art. You know, when you see these sort of like small movements of like, whether it's like, you know, kind of like the new like neo-surrealist movements and quote unquote lowbrow, etc. I mean, I think that you can see these patterns of artists of how they get success, and a lot of it is by doing the same kind of image over and over again, creating a brand and really just operating as if it's a brand. And there's, again, like there's no judgment on that, and I totally understand it. And in fact, for myself, it's just been a thing that I just haven't matured in a sense to where I can settle on something like that. I've never like struck upon an image or a style and felt like, okay, yeah, this is it. I'm going to do this forever now. It just hasn't been possible for me. And I would say when it comes to music, Circa has always been this weird organic amalgamation of 5 consciousness, you know, all kind of working without censorship, and we just are what we are, and we always have been, and we've never followed a trend, and we've never done anything but sort of seek a deeper understanding of our own artistry. And I can see though that we have a brand, and it's interesting to me that it wasn't consciously calculated. So that's just sort of to play a little devil's advocate to my own statement there about visual artists who do the same thing. You know, maybe there's just something that they're doing that's organic and natural they're doing over and over again. But I do think that there's emulators, people that see that and then say, that's what I need to do in order to get, you know, 100K followers on Instagram or whatever, you know?
I love emulators personally. I have this N64 emulator that runs really well. It plays every game that I want.
I love emulators too.
And, no, but you, okay. So it's always funny to like read quotes back to people, but
I love
you
it.
did say this thing on a podcast about living authentically, which I think validates your point of what you just said. And you said, that's the thing. If you could get comfortable in your own skin and truly see that, the more connected to your higher self, truer self, and more comfortable you can be in just living authentically, and dropping the masks, dropping these stories and lies and filters that we sort of use to navigate every situation a little differently. The closer you can get to that, then you have it at all times. I think that validates what you're saying, because I think there's, yes, some people that are conscious about manipulating a trend, seeing the success, continuing that. But there are others that are just simply being themselves. And sometimes it's hard to pinpoint, but I feel like the energy is more felt. What do you think about that?
I think you're right. And I also think that probably when it comes to endurance, or just sort of like how you wind up seeing over time where, like, who is genuine and who sort of kind of like pitters out because they lose the ability to maintain the mask or whatever. I think that sort of time is this great equalizer in a lot of ways. It's like you see how trends kind of come and go. And I think Circa is a really good example of this. Is like, when we first came up, I think a lot of people probably just put us in a category and saw us as part of some kind of wave, but over time, by continuing to do our own thing, I think we just kind of proven ourselves to be our own thing. We've proven ourselves to be more than just part of a genre or like a trend. And I think that usually that's just what happens when there's genuine, like a compass point of like, all right, yeah, this is all like, it originates from a genuine, passionate place and not a calculated, manufactured, like, oh, this fits perfectly in this trend and it's going to be, a big success.
It's interesting just thinking about that word manufactured and how a lot of pop music is manufactured and a lot of people listen to this particular music. But I also think that maybe people are manufactured in a way. Maybe people on an unconscious level just kind of mold themselves into this zeitgeist of thought that is like,
sure,
people are popified in certain ways. But anyways, yeah, sure. Yeah,
no,
sure, I guess so.
No, I feel you. I mean, it was making me think about the fact that I have sort of a weak spot for certain types of pop music and pop structure, but there's still, I would say, there is a divider of like what I feel like is genuine and not. And I don't know, it's hard to quantify. I guess it's hard to explain, but I think we just have an intuitive sense for that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I just think it's funny to kind of like drift in and out of esoteric thought and then just kind of like sprinkle in that bit of, I don't know, malaise of humor, if you will.
Of course.
Yeah. But anyways, man, I mean, I appreciate you for, taking the time to do this. And
of course,
yeah, it's a big honor for me since I grew up listening to you guys.
Of course. It's a weird thing to be still on this journey and for it to like continually connect me to people who I, have these, I already was a fan of yours and already, was into what you do. And like, this just happens to me a lot now where I am always kind of like, I don't know. I presume the opposite. I always presume that no one knows. And, so I'm always, pleasantly surprised when someone says that they know the band or they were into the band at some point. And it's always a joy, to be like, cool. Well, now we get to be friends, which is awesome.
Totally. Yeah. Yeah. It must be the, all the bands that I've been in and, like, original, founder of Under Oath and, no, just kidding. I don't even know why I said that.
I was like, oh my God, really? Did I miss that? Did that really happen?
Yeah. Look me up. Yoshino, 2001, original founding member.
Damn.
It was just me, and then the rest of the, and then I left, and then they started the band. So,
Hey man, you can fool me. I'm not up on a lot of the trivia when it comes to bands' histories. It's always a thing that like when I do find out about it, I'm always like, wow,
yeah,
cool. So I'm like, I never would have called you on it. I'd be like, sweet,
yeah.
I didn't know that.
In all seriousness, I really do appreciate you for taking the time to do this. And Jennifer Sodini put us in touch.
Yes.
All right.
Hi, Jen. Love you.
Hi, Jen. Yeah, Jen's awesome. She's been putting me in touch with lots of awesome people. But yeah, no, thanks, man. I appreciate it.
Of course. Yeah. I feel like I completely like sidestepped the initial conversation about how Circa started, but my answer was pretty accurate as to like that was how it began as far as like my connection to Anthony. But as far as the actual story of Circa coming together and becoming a thing, it's a really long story and it takes a really long time to explain. But I will say that it all began in friendship.
Maybe we'll have to do another episode, and then you can a full explanation.
Yeah, do a part 2. Sounds good. Be like the prequel.
yeah, the prequel. Yeah, exactly.
Love it.
All right, man. Cool. Well, thanks so much. Music for the podcast is by Rarebit, aka Justin Dosher Hopkins. Creative producer is Noah Wainwright. Research assistant is Trevor Joyce. And intern is Sam King.